extended by 4 weeks after MPs backed the government in a Commons vote by 461 to 60. It means the regulations can stay in place until the 19th of July. Downing Street has insisted the Prime Minister has full confidence in the Health Secretary Matt Hancock. Leaked messages from former adviser Dominic Cummings appear to show Boris Johnson calling Matt Hancock totally hopeless at the start of the pandemic. Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin both say their initial meeting today has been constructive. The US and Russian presidents have been in talks in Geneva. And Wales have beaten Turkey 2-0 to put themselves on the verge of qualifying for the quarter-finals of Euro 2020. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 12 points at 71.84. The pound buys $1.41 and €1.16. And the weather, thunderstorms moving northwards across parts of Wales and southern and central England overnight. Scotland and Northern Ireland will be clearer with a few showers, a low of 7. From Global's newsroom, I'm Dominic Ellis.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 8 o'clock on LBC. Time for our third visit of the week to Cross Question. We have a brilliant panel for you tonight. Lots of questions lined up too, but if you'd like to ask yours, 0345 6060 973. Joining me are Charlie Mullins, the businessman and founder of Pimlico Plumbers. Angus MacNeil is the SNP MP for a constituency I can't pronounce and chair of the International Trade Select Committee. I know I make that joke every time I speak to him. Edwina Currie, the writer, broadcaster, former Conservative Health Minister, and Gracie Bradley, who's Interim Director of Liberty, the UK's largest civil liberties organisation. And don't forget, you can watch us as well on Global Player on lbc.co.uk or the LBC YouTube, Facebook and Twitter feeds. So let's crack on with your first question.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, welcome everybody. Let's go to our first question. It's Tony in Doncaster. Hello, Tony.
Hello, Iain.
Hi, what would you like to ask?
Would the panel agree with the Prime Minister's description of the Health Secretary? And if so, who would they like to see the next Secretary of State of Health to be?
Well, we should remind everyone that this was a text exchange between Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson, which Dominic Cummings released today, in which the Prime Minister is alleged to have texted that the Health Secretary was effing useless. Charlie Mullin, not a sentence I'm sure you'd utter about any of your staff. What's your view of Matt Hancock?
Well, I mean, he doesn't obviously. I've done work with him in the past on apprentices. I'm probably going to be honest. I think he's out of his depth in the role he's in at the moment. He's really moved up the ladder and maybe a little bit too quick without the experience. So, I think in a way, I'm not over pleased with him. I think he's made many mistakes, and nobody has a lot of confidence in him in what's gone on with the way that he's dealt with the pandemic.
Angus MacNeil, do you have any sympathy for Matt Hancock?
Well, I mean, I think perhaps, that was maybe the first exchange, and perhaps Boris is going to describe the rest of his cabinet in similar terms and maybe apply it to himself because of the way that certainly the government at Westminster have been not just over COVID but over Brexit. I think it may be applied to them all and not least the Australian trade deal. But they could go to Scotland or Wales if they needed any tips or lessons. They'll be doing a better job in both countries. Not just the SNP, you'll note Iain there, but it's also been better in Cardiff.
Well, has it really, though? If you look at the performance of the SNP government on care homes, for example, in many, the death rate in Scotland, I don't think is very different from England. The hospitalisation rate wasn't very different to England. Maybe Nicola Sturgeon might be using similar terms about her health secretary.
No, I think one of the early decisions taken in Scotland when the vaccination came in wasn't the rate of vaccination, but the effectiveness of vaccination. So we knew that vaccinating a group of 80-year-olds prevented more deaths than vaccinating a group of 50-year-olds, such as myself. So that's what we did. We vaccinated at that level and we've been effective.
So did the Westminster government?
No, they didn't. They were running at shots in arms indiscriminately without much thought.
No,
It was
they weren't.
It's quite a stushy at the time.
That's just completely untrue.
It was quite a stushy at the time in Scotland. Is exactly what the Tories in Scotland were saying and complaining, that we weren't getting the jags in the arms, and we were jagging in the arms according to the cohort. And that was the way we did it in Scotland, very deliberately at the beginning.
Well, it's quite incredible that you should say that, because that was exactly what happened.
You've got it the other way around.
In England. No. In England, it was happening exactly the same way. If there were spare vaccines at the end of the day, which they would have had to ditch, yes, then they gave them to people
at the very
who
beginning,
weren't in those age cohorts.
Scotland had a very targeted cohort thing that England didn't. There you go.
Well, Edwina Currie, is that the way you remember it?
No, it's not the way I remember it at all. In fact, if you look at the vaccine rollout in England, Scotland and Wales, what you find is actually Wales is doing the best. England is not.
Yeah, agreed.
And Scotland is a little bit behind, and that means that you've got...
A week ago, Scotland was third, Wales was, I think, first, and England was behind that. But anyway, it's marginal.
Can I get a word in edgeways?
Okay.
Right, and I'm going to try not to talk rubbish and not follow the example of Angus. Look, having been a health minister, albeit an extremely junior one, I can tell you something. You don't get an extra dose of brains or courage or experience when you take on the job. Matt Hancock actually came into it in 2018, so he wasn't exactly new to it. But nonetheless, absolutely nobody was prepared for the pandemic. The particular incident, I think, that led to the juicy remarks that you quoted, Iain, was about the shortage of PPE. There was a worldwide shortage of PPE. We tended to get it mostly from China, and much of China had shut down because of the pandemic. And you don't have a magic wand. You cannot just magic up the stuff that everybody like Angus and so on is screaming for just by snapping your fingers. It doesn't work like that. I think Matt Hancock has grown into this job. I think he's got better and better at it. He is a technocrat, doesn't seem to have a sense of humour, but he is, if I were Secretary of State, he's exactly the person I would want to have at my right hand, doing the work, plodding on, getting on with it, working extremely long hours.
But you have to accept, though, that Dominic Cummings, I mean, he was there at the centre, and whatever you think about some of the rights and wrongs about how he's released information, you can't just dismiss his allegations, can you?
Yes, I can.
Oh, really?
Well, because I think I don't know Dominic Cummings. I haven't, and I have no desire to, but he creates a very febrile, hostile, us and them atmosphere. And I suspect that when Boris was replying to him, Boris was saying, look, calm down. I agree with you. Everybody's useless except you, Dominic. But you know what? As soon as Dominic Cummings left the government, things started to improve quite dramatically, and the atmosphere has been much better.
Gracie May Bradley, what's your view?
Well, look, I think when we get into conversations like this, and Tony, I think it is a really good question. It's easy to talk about it as if it's a bit of Westminster intrigue and it's all about the personalities and not about, really significant policy decisions that have governed how people have lived and died over the last year. And, I think that there are some things in Matt Hancock's brief that haven't gone very well. We had a test and trace scheme that was found to have been set up unlawfully because there was no data protection impact assessment. It was pretty leaky. You had people being deterred from giving their information because information was being shared with the police in the Home Office. We had that enormous outlay on consultants. There were really significant issues with PPE. But, I don't think it's fair to kind of lay it all at Matt Hancock's door because we've also had quite massive issues with people who've been left out of the pandemic response, disabled people who've seen care stripped away, migrants who've not been able to access services, failures around sick pay and unsafe workplaces. So, yes, there are clearly things that are within Matt Hancock's brief that should have gone differently. But I think that can be said across government. I don't think it should rest with him.
Talking of people's right to privacy, people's civil liberties, does the Prime Minister not have a right to protection here with his text messages? I'm sure if Meghan Markle had been in receipt of these text messages from Dominic Cummings, she'd be going to the law over them now, but Boris Johnson can't really do that, can he?
Yeah, I think there's some really interesting litigation going on at the minute, actually, around government by WhatsApp and government by disappearing message. And I think, when we're talking about decisions on the national scale and the administration of public life, I think there's a balance to be struck there between the right to privacy and the public interest in a way that's different when it comes to other people.
OK, let's go back to Tony. Tony, what do you think?
Well, I go back to January 2020 when Matt Hancock was asked in the House of Commons about our state of preparedness if this virus managed to penetrate the UK, and his answer was, what was it, Ian?
I've no idea, you tell me.
Well, it was that he'd got no reason to think that we weren't as prepared as we always are.
What would you expect him to have said then? I mean, would you expect him to say, no, actually, we're not prepared at all, oh my God, let's all panic? Do a Corporal Jones?
I wouldn't expect him to have answered in those words. I would have expected him to go off and examine the actual probability or otherwise of it actually penetrating the UK.
And you don't think that's what he did?
What?
Yeah. You don't think that's what he absolutely did? Edwina, you wanted to come in.
Well, yes. I mean, all the preparedness was assuming it was going to be a worldwide flu epidemic. And we weren't the only country that thought that. In fact, the World Health Organization reckoned we were one of the best prepared for a future flu pandemic. Coronavirus presented all sorts of unusual and totally unexpected elements. And Matt Hancock himself, in the evidence that he gave recently to the Health Select Committee, said that he wished that he had insisted on a different pattern of doubts, that instead of accepting all the experts saying to him that there was no way this thing could be passed on if you didn't have any symptoms, which turns out to be absolutely wrong, he wishes that he had erred on the side of caution and said, well, let's work on the basis that it can be passed on until proven the opposite. Don't be Mr. Hindsight, Tony. It's the easiest job in the world, and hindsight is never available when you need it.
OK, Tony, thank you. Let's go to our next caller, Simon in Oxford. Hi, Simon. What's your question, please?
Yeah, good evening. I was in the army for 12 years. I had countless numbers of mandatory vaccinations so I could do my job safely. I just wondered why the panel think it's so controversial to ask health workers to have one vaccination that the general public are generally queuing up for.
Gracie, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a brilliant question. And I think it's a really difficult issue. There's a real balance of rights to be struck here, because when we look at who's been disproportionately affected by the pandemic, nobody can deny it's had this enormous impact on older people and on disabled people, not just, the impact of the illness itself, but also the impact of not being able to see family or having care stripped away or do not resuscitate orders and so on that have disproportionately been placed on disabled people. So I absolutely don't want to minimise the impact of the pandemic on particular groups. And, I don't think we can understate kind of how enormously vaccination has changed the game and how important vaccination is in protecting people who are at particular risk. I think the difficulty comes in, and I think the British Medical Association put it really well, actually, in the fact that coercion carries its own risks. There's the real potential for this to be counterproductive. Because if you're someone who's thinking, I'm really not sure about vaccination, what if the government's got an ulterior motive, et cetera, and just to be clear, I don't endorse those views, but if you're one of those people, then mandatory vaccination is actually very likely to entrench those views. And I think what we've really seen throughout the pandemic is this rush to kind of coercion, criminalisation, and actually what ministers should really still be talking about is supporting people to be vaccinated, educating people, really encouraging people towards informed consent, getting rid of any barriers that might be in the way to vaccination. There'll be some care workers who, for example, don't get sick pay and they're going to be worried about being off work with side effects. So I think there's all of these other things that should be in play before we get to that conversation about mandating jabs. And I think, absolutely don't disagree on the importance of it, especially for people who are particularly vulnerable. Just think that there's a real risk that this could be counterproductive and we'll be in a position where people are potentially having to think about their livelihoods versus their bodily autonomy. And that's just a position we don't want to be in.
Do you find it awkward to be on the same side of the argument as people like Steve Baker, Mark Harper, the sort of conservative libertarians?
I mean, not at all. I mean, Liberty, we are a civil liberties organisation that also cares about equality. And, you know, I have a really strong libertarian streak. I wouldn't be the director otherwise. We've always worked cross-party. We will take our allies where we can find them. So, no, not at all.
OK, right, we're going to wait a couple of minutes to get the reaction from the rest of the panel. Edwina, Currie, Angus MacNeil and Charlie Mullins. It's 8:15.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:18. The panel are in the middle of answering a question from Simon in Oxford, who said, having served for 12 years for the army and received several vaccinations as part of the job, why is it so controversial to ask care staff to do so? Angus MacNeil, this is... I mean, I can see the civil liberties arguments here, but if I had a relative in a care home, I would not want them to be cared for by someone who hadn't had a vaccination. That's not an unreasonable expectation, is it?
No, it's not unreasonable at all. I mean, you can cut this every way you want. I mean, you can look at it from that angle that you've just looked at, which is a perfectly reasonable angle. You look at the angle from the staff. I mean, I think Gracie Bradley said it very well from Liberty. It's part of the education, and then people do it freely. Perhaps look at countries that have been more successful in doing this without coercion and see exactly what happens. There are certain rumours I heard in and around the health that it could affect for young women pregnancy, which was nonsense, but it was a rumour that went round. There was a rumour I even checked with Jonathan Van Tam, and he'd actually heard it because his own daughter, I think, is a nurse or something. So, those sort of things are in the backs of people's minds, but it's always, or is often difficult to get people to do what's best for them. I mean, we just need to look at smoking, for instance, But I think when people realise and look at the balance of probabilities and staying out of hospital and not passing on the virus, I've had both vaccines, the AstraZeneca Jags, the Oxford Zeneca Jags, and fine, and I would encourage all friends I have to do the same in any family. I'd rather that than in the small island I live in, a guy in the next village died of COVID-19, That was before the vaccines came out.
But the Westminster government is going to make it mandatory for care homes. They're going to consult on whether it should be widened out to NHS workers. What's the Scottish government going to do?
Well, actually, I have to confess, I'm not sure about what they're doing to that.
What do you think they should do?
I mean, if it was me, I just don't think there's a big deal about this stuff, but I know other people think there is a big deal about this stuff. So, fortunately, I'm not the dictator of Scotland. Otherwise, they would probably say, yes, just have the jag and you'll be fine. But
life would be very different, wouldn't it?
As me being a dictator, Ian, and we don't quite live in that situation. I think Gracie actually laid out the terms of the debate very well, and I think they're the more important debates, the more important points to dwell on.
Edwina.
Yeah, I'm probably the only person here that's ever been subject to compulsory vaccination, in the sense that when I was a baby, it was compulsory for smallpox. And that was a very significant element in eradicating smallpox worldwide, not just in Britain. And that was stopped in 1948. We haven't had compulsory vaccinations ever since. I heard what Gracie said, and I have to say, I think, in fact, exactly that's what the government has been doing, trying to persuade people, not just the government, but everybody involved, the GPs, all the vaccination centres. There's been enormous effort to persuade people, and not just that also, but to look for the research data that can answer the question, like pregnant women, for example. I mean, now we know that 100,000 pregnant women in America have been vaccinated safely with no side effects. And indeed, it looks as if in the last 3 months, the last trimester, you're much more likely to catch COVID. So it's even more important to get vaccinated. And that updated advice, that updated knowledge is readily available. I would agree in this sense that making it compulsory is the last resort. On the other hand, I think the employers there, Ian, have got an absolute obligation to maintain a safe working environment for everybody else in the care home. And the individual who puts their liberty above everything else, you've really got to ask what they're doing working in that kind of environment. That just doesn't make any kind of sense to me. If this nudge gets everybody in that vulnerable situation, working in care homes with people who really do need their help, and it's personal care. You can't do it at 6 feet distance. If you're wiping somebody's face, you've got to be right in there. To take the opportunity actually to go a bit further and say, look, if everybody's vaccinated, we can get rid of those masks. We can get back to creating a much pleasanter, more normal environment for everybody working and living in a care home. To me, that actually matters a heck of a lot more. We are always trading rights to get some greater benefit. And in this case, it's only a very small one. And goodness knows they've had plenty of time to say yes to the vaccine.
Yeah.
I'm for that.
Charlie Mullins.
Well, you know my view on it. I came up with it back in, I think, January, that no jab, no job. We're not taking people on as from September that haven't had the jab. Talking about the care homes, we're very slow off the mark. It should have been something that compulsory happened from immediately with the NHS staff all across the board. How can you put somebody in charge of elderly patients, people that are not well, that haven't had the vaccination? Over 40,000 cases or 40,000 deaths in care homes alone, they say it's COVID related. So we're so slow on it. Of course, you've got to make it compulsory. Of course, you've got to protect people that they're looking after. And then you've also got to protect themselves. So, you know, my views is that we're very slow on it. The quicker we bring it in, the quicker we make it across the board, the quicker, as Edwina said, we get back to some form of normality. We've been offered one way to fight this pandemic, and that way is to take the jab. There's been so much made about it. Angus mentioned about pregnant women and other people that don't have it, but there's been no cases proven that the vaccine is going to put them in danger. The only reason I believe that people shouldn't have the vaccine or vaccination is purely on a medical grounds only. But you've got so many people on about human rights and I'm not being told what to do. At the end of the day, it's all about people's lives, and the quicker that we get it out there, there's no other way out of it at the moment. So let's get it happening.
From the way that you're speaking, you would make it mandatory for everybody because you've told your own employees that if they don't have the jab, they won't have a job. Now, a lot of people say, well, they can understand that in care homes, but for other companies, particularly such as yours, why is that even necessary?
Well, it's fairly obvious. We're going into customers' homes. Why would we be putting a customer at risk that a plumber's gone in, he's not been vaccinated? We have 200 odd staff in an office. Why would we allow people in the office that haven't had the vaccine or the vaccination that's going to put everyone else at risk? I mean, we're talking life and death here. I really don't understand why people are pussyfooting around with it. We also got to remember, I think 80% of NHS workers have had it now. So it's only a minority now that are sort of just holding back a little bit. But I'm sure it's a no-brainer, isn't it? That why would you allow anyone in your house that has a vaccination and going to put yourself at risk? Why would you do that?
Well, couldn't you redeploy people who, for whatever reason, have an objection to having the vaccine? Maybe they've got medical reasons for not having it. I don't know.
Sure,
but surely you can redeploy them.
Well, where am I going to put them then? I can't. Our engineers, they go out into people's houses, and we need to protect their customers. We need to protect their staff. When people come into our building, how can we just allow people in that's not prepared to have the vaccination, but many other reasons other than medical terms? I mean, there's no way around it. You can't.
But that is an argument, Charlie. That is an argument for every customer-facing organisation to do the same thing. And I mean, does the law even allow you to do that at the moment?
Evidently, it looks like you can do it. You can add it to your contracts. All it's a case of is that the employee agrees that they're going to have the vaccination. Same we're offering positions, jobs now, and saying that only apply if you've had the vaccination.
I can understand that. I can understand that for new people, but I just wonder whether the law allows you to do that with existing employees, because you're effectively saying sign this new contract or you won't have a job.
Well, you can word it how you want. What we're saying to them is that, the new contract says that we would like you to have the vaccination. If they don't agree with it, we're able to sack them over that. But the end result is, I think it's going to be no other choice. They're not going to get a job elsewhere, and we can't take the risk for the rest of our staff. So, we'll have to work our way through it. But according to our lawyers, we're not doing nothing incorrect. We're actually protecting our staff and protecting our customers.
Stuart has texted and say, can you ask Charlie Mullins if he's had his vaccine? As I seem to recall, it was reported that he'd been hesitant in the past. I think last time you were on LBC, you said you hadn't had it. Have you had it now?
That's right. I've just come back from abroad. I've got it scheduled in for next week. I can't wait to get it done. The fact that I've been abroad for quite a few months, you can't get it elsewhere. I'm back here. I can't wait to have it done.
Well, that's simply not true. I've got friends I think you were living in Spain for a lot of lockdown. I've got friends in Spain most of whom have all had the jab. Why have you waited so long?
Well, you have to be a resident in Spain. I'm not a resident in Spain. I mean, honestly, you ain't going to trip me up on this one, mate. If I could have had it in Dubai, I would have had it. If I could, know what I'm just saying. If I could have had it in Spain, I would have had it. I've come back to London. It's scheduled for next week. Can't wait to have it.
Fantastic. Another text here from Terry who says, Iain, does your panel agree that if you transplanted the present cabinet's brains into a flock of sparrows, they would all fly backwards? I don't think we need to trouble ourselves with that one too much, do we? But I'm interested in Simon in Oxford. You asked the question yourself. What's the answer from your point of view?
Well, I mean, the answer from my point of view, and it doesn't just go to care workers, it goes to everyone who's reluctant to have the vaccine. Now, I'd like to politely ask them what is their own individual concern. And I think we could potentially do more to then address that concern. If it's a concern about fear of injections, then there are certain things that can be done to help them through that. If it's about a certain type of vaccine, then maybe we offer them a different type, because we get to this sort of mopping up stage now where we need to sort of catch up with these people who maybe missed out when it went through the various age groups.
Okay, Simon, thank you very much indeed for that. Let me just tell you a few of the names that are going to be on Cross Question next week. We're hoping to have at least some panellists back in the studio. We have Owen Jones on, Justine Greening, Andrew Adonis, Petronella Wyatt, Sir Michael Fallon, Ash Sarkar, the historian Sir Richard Evans, Sir Vince Cable, Alex Salmond and Andrea Ledson, plus some others too. So it should be a good week next week. Right, we will come back to our panel with some more of your questions. If you haven't phoned in yet, but you've just suddenly thought of the most brilliant question ever, 0345 6060 973. 8:30 is the time here on LBC. Let's get the news headlines from Dominic Ellis.
The Health Secretary Matt Hancock has confirmed the government will be making COVID vaccinations compulsory for staff in care homes in England. Unions have already said the plans could result in staff leaving their jobs, but Downing Street says it's concerned about low uptake rates. Downing Street has insisted the Prime Minister has full confidence in the Health Secretary. Leaked messages from former adviser Dominic Cummings appear to show Boris Johnson calling Matt Hancock totally hopeless at the start of the pandemic. And lockdown restrictions in England will be extended by 4 weeks after MPs back the government in a Commons vote. It means the regulations can stay in place until the 19th of July. And the weather. Thunderstorms moving northwards across parts of Wales and southern and central England overnight. Scotland and Northern Ireland clearer with a few showers, a low of 7 degrees.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 8:34 on LBC. Let me reintroduce you to my panel. Edwina Currie is here, former Conservative Health Minister, author and broadcaster. Gracie May Bradley is head of Liberty. Charlie Mullins is a businessman, chief executive of Pimlico Plumbers, founder of Pimlico Plumbers indeed. And Angus MacNeil is an SNP MP and she chairs the International Trade Select Committee. Right, let's go to our next question. It's a good one from James in Ayrshire. Hello, James.
Hello, Ian. It's nice to speak to you again. And thanks for taking this question. I was going to ask it a week or so ago, and I didn't get on, but your researcher kindly got in touch with me tonight, so I can ask it now. My question is a united Ireland and an independent Scotland an inevitability within the next generation?
It's quite apposite today because Leo Varadkar, the Taoiseach, the Deputy Prime Minister in Ireland, he's made a speech today all about a united Ireland. Obviously, I'm going to come to Angus MacNeil first on this, but let's concentrate on the united Ireland bit as well, as because obviously you think it is inevitable that Scottish independence will happen. But what about a united Ireland as well?
I think on the balance of probabilities, you've got to say yes. I mean, I saw something on Twitter, I think last night, by the Reverend Catherine Sutherman, I think it was, talking about 14-year-olds in Northern Ireland who said the most important thing is we just learn to become friends with each other. So if the youth are thinking like that and not wanting to live in the sectarian morass that their parents have told them about, I'd say there's hope. And then you've got to look back in history. What were the reasons for Northern Ireland splitting off from the Republic? Well, apart from Lloyd George stoking it and being warned about it in the Commons, it was essentially religion and economics. And when you look in the island of Ireland today and you see the GDP per capita divide across the border is greater than East to West Germany, the economic argument is with the Republic and the religious argument is sort of dissipated as well. So I think once people get over a sort of a habit or a tradition or whatever and see and look to do their best economics, I'd say that a united Ireland is probably coming for them. And the only caution I would have for them, or the only thing I would say to the people in the Republic is improve your health service a little bit and you'll make the field even greener. And rather than force any cows into any field, to steal a metaphor, the grass is green, they'll walk in themselves. So I do think an independent Ireland's on the way, and a united Ireland's on the way. Probably the protocol is helping it, and the whole Brexit debacle is helping it too, and an independent Scotland's coming whenever the Scots get a chance to vote in it.
It's interesting what you said about economics, because in the end, I suspect economics are going to be the crucial issue here. And the task for the SNP, presumably, is to convince the Scottish people that the economics stack up. Now, that obviously in 2014 that didn't quite happen. There was this 800-page white paper which had a lot of detail, but there were still lots of questions which remain unanswered. Do you think that it's going to be possible to answer those this time?
You know, the document you're referring to is just out of Adam's reach, Ian. Yeah, I mean, I think it is. I mean, if Scotland became independent, it'd be the richest country ever to become independent. And if we look on the history of the UK, let's say in the last 75 years, if we're talking about economics, the UK has borrowed for, 64 of the last 75 years of that debt that is borrowed is paid back only 1.7% of it. So I do think that becoming independent and having our own currency is pretty important. We can see the advantage of having your own currency. Modern monetary theory does a lot of talk about that. But we can see what's been happening with, probably since the 2008 crash, but more laterally in and around COVID, where the government's been borrowing from itself, i.e. it's been printing the money, and it's been doing that without inflation. So it's given itself an awful lot of latitude. 100 years ago, there were about 50 independent states in the world. There's now about 200. Europe alone has as many independent countries as the world once did. It's a natural way of things. Empires have gone, empires have declined. And I think it's just the way it's going to go. And, we've got the Republic of Ireland. The UK is only 100 years old. Some people, it's not even 100 years old. Some people think it's hundreds of years old, but it isn't. And independence is the natural way to go, and will be, as the Irish and English are, great friends as a result.
Okay. And just very briefly, do you think that it's inevitable that if Scotland became independent and there was a united Ireland, do you think there might be pressure for regions of England to break away and become independent, sort of Cornwall, for example, or dare I say it, Norfolk?
Well, it'll probably make great sense for them. I mean, England's a very centralised, and by extension, the UK is a very centralised state. I think England could do well after it gets its independence to learn from the places like Switzerland, who've got 26 cantons with a huge deal of autonomy across those cantons. Be very beneficial to Cornwall, from what I see on the television. I've never been there, but I think Cornwall having power would be no harm at all to Cornwall, rather than being a satellite of somewhere else. Maybe Norfolk too. You might be more experienced in Norfolk than I am. It's not somewhere I've been.
I could become Prime Minister of Norfolk. That has a great appeal to me.
I would invite you around to the Scottish High Commission for some Ferrero Rochers, perhaps.
Charlie Mullins, United Ireland, independent Scotland, inevitable?
To be honest, that's not my strong point. I'm not up on that one at all, so I'm going to skip that one. Angus and Edwina and Grace, I'm sure you can more on that than me. That's not for me, that one.
Yeah, but emotionally, would you be sorry if Scotland became independent?
I think so, yeah. I think we all work better together. But at the end of the day, they've obviously been fighting for the independence for a long time, and if they feel they're better, but of course it'd be a loss to all of us. We need to be united as we are, and I think with the situation we have at the moment with the COVID and the problems that we have out there, we're better off all together. But, as I say, it's not my strong point on that.
Okay, Edwina.
Oh, wow. It's not inevitable. It's possible. Is it likely? I have a feeling that actually the unification of Ireland could be a possibility, with the Good Friday Agreement now receding into more than 20 years ago, and including a very clear statement that the whole of that protocol depends on popular vote. There will come a point where there will be another vote in Northern Ireland, and it could be that the balance of the votes may change. That would cause an awful lot of heart-searching and ructions, but that would be, in many ways, I think, a possibility. However, I'm listening hard to what Angus is saying, and I'm very puzzled as to why. I hear that, he wants independence, but what for? And to create what kind of Scotland, what kind of society? Why is it so much better to do it without working together with Scotland? When Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776, he did it because there was one almighty economic puzzle. How come Scotland, after joining with England in the Act of Union, became a great deal more prosperous? What was going on? That nobody could understand it. There'd been the assumption that Scotland would be desperately impoverished and that be overwhelmed by London, which, is kind of what's coming back to me about this independence thing. And it simply wasn't true. Opening up borders and doing trade with each other actually doesn't impoverish. It actually enriches both sides. That's what we're trying to do post-Brexit right now.
You've closed all the borders.
And, I was a Remainer. I campaigned for Remain because I believe Scotland is better in the Union, and I believe that we were better in the Union. And as Iain will know, I work hard for Brexit afterwards, because once there's a vote, democracy becomes more important. It's the greatest right of all, and you have to respect democracy. Otherwise, you just create all sorts of further problems. But in the end, the Curries and MacDonalds were the Clan Ranald, Angus.
Oh dear!
I've got family all over Scotland.
I'll have you know, you're talking to a Campbell here, Edwina. So I don't know how we get on so well, because we ought to be mortal enemies.
The Curries were famous poets to Clan Ranald and MacDonald, and indeed. And I think perhaps Edwina, with the greatest respect, has been waxing a little too lyrical there, as her ancestry might enable her. When you look at austerity and the number of choices they've made in Westminster taxing bedrooms, and we don't do things together. Scotland voted to stay in the European Union, but the old joke was a Scotsman, Englishman, Irishman went to a pub and they all left. Why? Because the Englishmen decided to. We decided we wanted to stay in the European Union. Let us stay in the European Union. But
hang on a minute. You cannot.
And we were promised in 2014 we would get that if we stayed in the UK. That was a promise.
Yeah, you can't automatically. Hang on. You can't assume that you would get back into the EU just like that.
There needs to Oslo and Reykjavik. I would put money on it.
That's done on veto. And there are several other countries, starting with Italy and Spain, who really don't want bits of their countries.
The Spanish have said not a problem.
Oh, it could be. You could
That's
find
fine.
yourselves in absolutely.
There are the needs to
Right.
make a noise about. It's not a problem.
Now, I want to bring Gracie into this, unless she's going to do a Charlie Mullins style cop out on this question. United Ireland, independent Scotland.
No, look, I did contemplate doing a Charlie, and I have to say, James's question is...
But she's going to show some liberty now.
It's stretching, the limits of my expertise. But look, I think we can all agree that self-determination is a really important fundamental right, and I would emphasise that. But I also think, actually, Edwina, you touched on it, on that question of why and the importance of respecting democracy. And I think, Angus, you touched on it as well. You talked about austerity. I mean, I think when you look at what the Westminster administration is up to at the minute, it's not actually the most attractive prospect for anybody who wants to live somewhere that's bothered about democracy and the rule of law and, basic norms of equality and inclusion. If we consider that we've got a government that's brought forward a policing bill which is aiming to basically extinguish our right to effective protest, wants to water down the Human Rights Act, wants to curtail access to judicial review, also wants to silence us at the ballot box with voter ID. I think when you put all of those things together...
Hang on. You're using some fairly lurid... Hang on a second. You're using some fairly lurid language there, if I may say so. Silence us at the ballot box, eliminate protests.
Absolutely.
Nothing like overstating the case, is there?
Accountability, unfortunately. And I know it may sound lurid if you haven't looked at those... If you look at all of those different things as disparate proposals, it may seem like saying, there's a real war on accountability. That may seem lurid. But actually, when you add them up and when you look at what was on page 48 of the manifesto, actually, that's exactly the agenda. It's shutting us down at every turn. And I think, if you want to live somewhere where you listen to and where those basic norms and the rule of law and democracy are respected, Westminster needs to up its game.
How is it? When you talk about voter ID, and we're going way off the subject here, but you did raise it. When you talk about voter ID, how is introducing a system that most other countries in the world use, including Northern Ireland, how is that silencing people at the ballot box?
So the issue is that lots of places that use voter ID already have mandatory ID or have introduced some kind of mandatory ID scheme. And that's the case in Northern Ireland. And also there were specific reasons why voter ID was introduced in Northern Ireland. The issue in the UK is that is that lots of people don't have ID. Millions of people don't have photo ID. So there's and those people are in disproportionately younger, disproportionately disabled, disproportionately from minoritized groups. So that data is all already there. And at the same time, what the government is saying is, actually, there are real issues with voting at the ballot box. But all the research shows that actually voting at the ballot box is really, really quite secure. And there aren't widespread public concerns about voting at the ballot box. So the issue is, it's a solution in search of a bit of a problem. And at the same time, it's going to disenfranchise a lot of people. That's the concern.
Right, we're going to move. I know, Edwina, you're desperate to come in, but we're running out of time, and I do want to get two more questions in before the end of the show. And I should say that if you haven't heard enough of Edwina this evening, and who could, let's face it, she appeared on my Iain Dale All Talk podcast the other day, 90 minutes that was, and it's had rave reviews on Twitter, Edwina. I hope you've seen. People have really enjoyed it, so do search that out if you like to listen to your podcast. It's 8:47.
This is LBC with more Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 10 to 9 on LBC. Edwina, Currie, Gracie May Bradley, Charlie Mullins and Angus MacNeil answering your questions. Let's go to our next one. It's Philip in Archway. Philip, hi.
Good evening, everybody. I'd like to ask, what does the panel think about banning fire and rehire?
Charlie Mullins.
I can't hear you, fella. Could you say that again?
The question was, what do the panel support banning fire and rehire? What British Airways did, British Gas did, basically say to their employees, well, we're going to, unless you accept this new contract, we're going to fire you.
Yeah, totally incorrect. I mean, there's no way to treat staff. That's very intimidating. Put a lot of good engineers and British Airways staff in a very difficult position. Totally incorrect. Shouldn't be allowed. And you certainly wouldn't expect that from companies like that have been around for a long time. But to treat their staff like that, that's just disgusting. Absolutely.
Do you think that legislation is needed, or could it be done any other way? Because this sort of thing did not happen years ago, did it? It's only relatively recently that it's caught on.
Yeah. Of course we need more legislation to protect the staff in a situation like that. I believe they've paid a lot of them off and as you say, offering them jobs back that are a lot less money, a lot more hours. Totally incorrect. I mean, that needs to be looked into and a stop put on it.
Gracie May Bradley, what's your view on this?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with Charlie. I think it's a really significant workers' rights issue. And I'm not entirely sure about, I'm not an employment law expert, so I'm not entirely sure about whether legislation's needed on this specific issue. But I'd also point to the fact that, trade unions are also a really important kind of protective institution for workers. And there's legislation there like the Trade Union Act 2016, which really gets in the way of some worker organising. So there's bits of legislation we might want to see gone, as well as potentially new protections too.
Edwina?
Well, it started and then it stopped, didn't it? It started in July last year and then it stopped in September last year, if I remember rightly. It's not a good way to handle people. And it strikes me, actually, that now that we have a real shortage of a workforce in Britain, we have unemployment going down. I mean, there were forecasts during the pandemic that unemployment would go right through the roof, and it hasn't happened. We've still got quite a lot of people on furlough coming off, and vacancies going up quite quickly. But if that's the kind of company you're working for and they're treating you like that, you've got plenty of choice. Go and find yourself something better. And you will then be able to work for wonderful employers like Charlie, who never ever get taken to a tribunal.
But what if they don't do? If you've been a British Airways flight attendant for 30 years or something, and you have a great affinity with the company, it's something that you've helped make successful, why should you have to be put in that position?
Well, I mean, nobody ever owes us a living in the end. Nobody has a right to stay in the same job forever. And it could be that if that's the only way that a business is going to be remain viable and not go bust. If it goes bust, of course, everybody loses their jobs and the pension fund may then be at risk as well. So for any particular bunch of senior managers or a board of directors, there could be some very complex and difficult decisions to make. And nobody has a veto in that kind of operation. But BA is, I don't think it's ever been the best run company, has it? And it's always been very big, it always struck me as being heavily overstaffed and so on. And it's hamstrung by having a huge pension fund, which takes a large chunk of the money that in a smaller, newer, brighter, quicker company, a challenger company, that money's going to the staff, not going into the pension fund.
Angus, I don't know if you... Go on, Charlie, very quickly.
I'd like Charlie to come in first, yeah.
Charlie.
No, go on. It might be your strong point, this one, but the way Century have treated their engineers, some of them have been loyal for over 30 years. They've just had them over, basically. I mean, they're basically offering them less money, more hours. Whichever way you want to dress up, they're never going to go bust, Century, but it just shows the quality of the company are. And, I have to be honest, we've had many of their engineers apply for positions with us, and they're gutted that that's probably not the right word to use on it, but they're pretty upset that They're no longer with which I used to think was a great company, but they're treating their staff like rubbish, and it's so wrong. And I honestly believe that it's the biggest mistake that they've made for many years to treat people like that. It's just no way it can happen.
Angus, I'm going to take it as read that you probably agree with what the rest of the panel has said on this, because I want to get this. Just a second. No, go on then. Go on.
Nikolai Tangen, who's the CEO of the Norwegian Oil Fund, was speaking to the committee today, and he's writing a paper at the moment about the changing face of capitalism. And there are many types of capitalism, and I think the capitalism that's been done there when people have specialised, given so many years to a company, is wrong, as Charlie has said. It's very heartening to hear the terms Charlie has spoken in, and it just shows the differences and the different approaches. And I think that British Airways and British Gas shouldn't be in this, and it should be outlawed.
Okay, right. Thank you very much, Philip. I'm going to go to Richard in Woolwich for our final question. Richard, actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to go to Martha in Liverpool, who sent in a text question, which is what I really wanted Angus to spend a little bit more time on answering. No, not football. You wouldn't want to do that, would you? Is the Australian free trade deal a reason for celebration or concern? Now, bear in mind, we've literally got 2 or 3 minutes left, if you can all be very brief. Angus.
Concern. Brexit's a forfeiture of 4.9% of GDP. The Australian trade deal is worth about 0.02% of GDP. That's like throwing away £4.90, scrabbling around for 2 pence, and at the risk of endangering farming as well. In Canberra at the moment, I'm pretty sure the champagne corks are popping. They've not had a trade deal like this ever, where they've got such market access into sugar, into dairy, into beef, into lamb. It's astonishing what they've achieved, the Australians, and the UK have been just too keen. They've given too quickly. They're coming back like Neville Chamberlain, waving peace in our time or trade deals in our time. It's not the right deal. The European Union are currently negotiating a deal. You can be damn sure the European Union wouldn't be risking their farming or giving the Australians this access. Well, however, the Australian team negotiators haven't been any Australian cricketer ever.
They've had 40 years to negotiate a deal and haven't managed it, have they? Edwina,
well, they haven't raised the white flag the way the UK has over trade. My goodness.
Yes. I'm sure the Scotch Whisky Association would agree with you. No,
this is a white flag issue.
Yeah,
Edwina.
No, it's good news, and we have no real idea how it's going to work out. But I'm in favour of free trade, not least because it pushes the different participants to think hard about how
it's going to work out, Edwina.
It pushes the participants to think, how is it going to work out, and how are we going to look after consumers? It means consumers in this country will have a much wider range of choices. I mean, back before the EU, back before we joined the EU, we were very close to Australia and New Zealand. I don't remember farmers complaining about that then. You just make sure that you label the stuff properly, and your customers, your consumers, will then be Stop being protectionist.
Well, if you're unconcerned about food security and jobs in the UK, then that's fine, but I am.
Okay.
More concerned about Scotch whisky. Go and talk to the people.
I'm concerned about Welsh farmers and Yorkshire farmers and sugar beet farmers in Norfolk, I think, as well.
All right.
There's a big world out there.
Okay.
It's not just
we can't hear if both of you talk over each other, so I'm going to go to the dulcet tones of Gracie.
Well, I mean, I think I might exercise my right to say, look, this is really not my wheel.
Do a Charlie. This is going to become. This is now a trend. It's going to be whenever anybody doesn't want to answer a question, we're going to do a Charlie.
I've got many strengths. This isn't one of them. I'll pass it on.
I'm quite enjoying Edwina and Angus having a row like man and wife there. I mean, you obviously disagree on it, but let's not kid anyone. We made a big mistake coming or Brexit, and this is the damage it's going to cause. We're looking for making that. We've got great deals with Australia. It's that, Edwin, it's a big mistake that's happened there, and we're going to have a lot more. Oh, you don't think it is?
I think that free trade deals are a very, very good thing. And it's very hard to predict how it will work out in future. But it's wrong to protect producers. In the end, you've got to look after your customers, the consumers. And the consumers are going to have a wider range of choice. And we had that range of choice.
Sorry, Angus, help me out here, mate.
Well, I mean, if the only farmers that are left are French farmers or German farmers, and then it ends up that the UK by Brexit is protecting farming in the EU because we've completely run up the white flag for farmers in the UK, then we're in a very, very dangerous and silly situation. We can only look back to World War II when we didn't have the ability to feed ourselves and we relied on Atlantic convoys who were often torpedoed. So things happen every century or so, whether it's a pandemic or a war, and you've got to make sure you've got food security. We're playing fast and loose, and frankly, we're gambling, Edwina. And as Charlie has said, Brexit's a huge mistake. 4.9% of GDP for 0.02% and risking farming. Edwina, really, come on.
Angus, we have not had total food security in this country for 400 years. We have not, apart from anything else.
Well, you're going to make it a whole lot worse, Edwina, by this policy. You're relying on France, Germany, and the Dutch.
I suppose
to feed you.
We can
concluding remark. I think we need to
anywhere in the world.
I think we need to remember that, of course, the EU was primarily a racket to protect French farmers all along. He said rather controversially.
When our farmers are going out of business as a result of
I don't think so. I don't think so. Right, look, I'm going to thank you all very much indeed. Edwina Currie, Gracie May Bradley, Angus MacNeil, Charlie Mullins. You have set a trend, Charlie. You're going to be live in eternity on this programme, because whenever anybody doesn't want to answer a question, I'm going to say, you're doing a Charlie Mullins, are you? So you're going to get a lot of free publicity from that. You're listening to LBC. In a moment, we're going to be talking about care homes. Should vaccinations be made mandatory for all care home staff? That's what the government has announced today. I'd quite like to hear from you if you work in a care home. Maybe if you're listening and you live in a care home, I'd be interested in your views as well. 0345 6060 973. It's 9:02.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, the Health Secretary Matt Hancock has confirmed the government will be making coronavirus vaccinations compulsory for staff in care homes in England. Unions have already said the plans could result in staff leaving their jobs, but Downing Street says it's concerned about low uptake.